Have you ever wondered why some of our parents' generation could buy multiple private properties? One of the major reasons were the lack of cooling measures 15 to 20 years ago. But things are different now. Every time you think you're finally ready to buy a property, another acronym gets dropped, whether it's TDSR, MSR, ABSD, LTV, or PLH. And so it's easy to assume that the government doesn't want us to buy property. But it's actually the opposite. These cooling measures protect your property portfolios and more importantly provide a safe haven for first-time buyers. Let's talk about this today. And here's what most people don't realize. Singapore's property market has been through two major crashes, once in 1998 during the Asian financial crisis and again in 2008 with the global financial crisis. Property prices nosedived, families were wiped out and recovery took years. So after 2008, once bitten twice shy, right? The government made a decision to put in long-term mechanisms not to block people like you and me, but to stop speculators from turning the property market into a casino. And that's the birth of cooling measures. Ever since then, despite COVID, rising interest rates, inflations or wars, Singapore property market didn't crash. But I get it, sometimes it's just not about the price of the properties, it's the system. Like you finally saved enough, but suddenly you're buried with all these acronyms, grey areas and conflicting advice. What if you buy too early or wait too long or trigger a tax that you didn't see coming? Most people didn't just back out just because they can't afford it, they back out because they are not sure if they are doing it right. And so in this video, I'm going to walk you through these mechanisms behind the cooling measures, how to navigate them smartly, and also what you should do today as a buyer, upgrader or a seller. And so first up, we have TDSR. TDSR stands for Total Debt Servicing Ratio. It limits how much of your income can go towards all your debt, including your mortgage, car loans, student loans, credit card, and everything. The Monetary Authority of Singapore, or MAS, introduced this TDSR in June 2013, setting the threshold at 60% of the borrower's gross monthly income. As part of additional cooling measures, this TDSR threshold was tightened to 55% in December 2021 to combat the rapid rising of property prices. And so today, no matter how much you earn, your total debt obligations must stay under 55% of your gross monthly income. Before TDSR was implemented, it was way too easy to overborrow, especially when interest rates were low. People were taking on massive loans with no limit, thinking that they could flip later or leverage on their other properties endlessly, which then led to the 2008 subprime mortgage crisis, when people started to default on their mortgage payments. TDSR was introduced to make sure that buyers could only borrow against a fraction of their full income. That way, they could still afford their mortgage repayments even if rates rise, and also to prevent the over-leveraging and a credit bubble from forming. This mechanism especially impacts those with other existing debts like a car loan or student loans or credit card loans. If you are self-employed or commission-based, banks may further discount your income further, which makes this 55% ceiling feel tighter. And so for an example, let's say you earn $6,000 a month. TDSR says that your total debt repayments cannot exceed $3,300. And if you already have a car loan at $600 a month, that means that your available loan limit drops down to $2,700 a month, which might not stretch far enough for that $1 million condo that you had in mind. This is how buyers can get blocked at the loan stage, because TDSR encompasses all your secured and unsecured debts. How to navigate TDSR smartly? Number one, clear all existing loans if you're planning to buy a property. Take note of those high commitment loans like car, personal loans, or even for some people, credit card loans. Clearing them would help with increasing your borrowing amount within the TDSR mechanism. And number two, use a TDSR calculator to estimate how much loan you actually qualify for, not just how much the property costs in terms of the down payment required. You can use the one at my website as an example. I'll leave the link below. And number three, consider longer loan tenures if needed. The lower your monthly repayments, the more it may fit into your TDSR range. Make sure that the monthly amount is sustainable for you in the long run. And of course, in doubt, speak to a mortgage specialist before you begin house hunting. Knowing your TDSR limit upfront saves you the disappointment later. This can be in the form of checking with a banker for an IPA or simply just approaching your property agent for advice. And now let's move on to the stricter cousin that applies to only HDB buyers, MSR. MSR stands for Mortgage Servicing Ratio. It caps how much of your gross monthly income can be used to repay your property loan only. And this applies only to HDB flats and executive condominiums or ECs. Unlike TDSR, which considers all your debt, MSR looks solely at your housing loan installment. And currently that limit is 30% of your gross monthly income. The MSR framework was introduced in stages. Before January 2013, MSR was at 40%. After January 2013, MSR for HDB loans reduced to 35% and 30% for bank loans. Shortly after, August 2013, HDB loans tightened further to 30% to be aligned with the banks, and by December 2013, you could now start taking bank loans for ECs. But of course, you have to adhere to the 30% MSR. And since then, MSR has remained at 30% even through rising prices to ensure that HDB and EC buyers don't overstretch financially. MSR was brought in to preserve public housing affordability. Imagine if MSR was the same as TDSR and people could just borrow more, people would be offering even higher prices for resale units and prices could climb higher than what we are seeing even today. MSR is the government's way of saying we want HDB to be affordable and also to have a sustainable growth. This rule forces buyers to assess what they can comfortably repay and not just what they wish they could afford. And again, this affects anyone taking a loan, whether it's HDB or bank loan for a new BTO flat, resale HDB flat, or an EC purchased directly from a developer. Even if your TDSR is fine, your MSR must also pass if you're buying one of these properties. And so now for an example, let's say you earn $6,000 a month. 30% of that is $1,800 a month, and that's your allowable housing loan installment. And so even if your TDSR is higher like the previous example of $3,300, you can still be blocked from buying that dream flat or EC if your housing installment exceeds $1,800. And this usually is a common pitfall when you're planning to upgrade from your existing HDB into a bigger resale or an EC bought directly from the developer. And how do we navigate MSR smartly? Number one, use the MSR specific calculators, again from the link below if you want to use from my website. And number two, if you're close to the cap, try stretching your loan tenure or increasing your down payment. And number three, do an IPA with a banker or a HFE if you're planning to take a HDB loan. Both are free and non-committal, and you can get a sense of your affordability prior to deciding to make a purchase. And so TDSR and MSR shows you how much you're allowed to borrow. But now, how much of that property price is the bank willing to finance? That's what the mechanism of LTV controls. LTV stands for loan to value ratio, and over the years it's been one of the government's most frequently adjusted levers to keep property buying sustainable. LTV determines how much of the property price the lender is able to finance. And here's a quick breakdown of how it's changed over the years. Before 2010, you could borrow up to 90% of the property value, meaning that if you purchase a $1 million property, whether it's HDB or private, you just needed to come up with 10% of the down payment and the bank takes care of the rest. Definitely one of the major reasons why people could buy all sorts of property easily back then. And by February 2010, the government started adjusting this mechanism. LTV was reduced to 80% for all bank loans. In July 2018, LTV was again reduced to 75% where it stands currently. At this point, it's important for you to know that LTV that has been adjusted so far was always for private property. HDB has remained the most affordable option because you could still take up to 90% LTV. However, that changed the last few years. HDB took several hits since December 2021, where LTV was revised to 85%, then 80% in September 2022, and finally 75% in August 2024, matching that of private properties. If your LTV cap is 75%, that means that the bank will only cover up to 75% of the price and you're responsible for the other 25% upfront. Hence, the term that you commonly hear out there, you require a 25% down payment for properties. That 25% down payment typically breaks down into 5% mandatory cash and 20% in CPF or additional cash if it's a bank loan. If it's a HDB loan, then the full 25% down payment can be paid in CPF less the option and exercise fee. And so, why the need for LTV? LTV ensures that you have accumulated enough wealth or have the ability to do so. And with more down payment required coupled with the TDSR and MSR mechanisms, that means that there is a lesser risk of over leveraging and over borrowing. It discourages buyers from taking on excessive debt and protects the market from speculative flipping, especially when interest rates are low and prices are rising fast. And this also ensures that if property prices really tank, you're not left with a negative equity with nothing but debt after selling the property. This mechanism affects everyone buying a home, whether you're buying a BTO flat, a resale condo or EC. As long as you're taking a loan, then you will have to watch out for this. And for an example, if you're buying a $1 million condo as your first home, based on the current LTV levels, max loan you can get is $750,000, which means you need to come up with $250,000 upfront. And if it's a bank loan, then at least $50,000 of it must be in cash. The rest can be in CPF. This is where many first-time buyers really feel the pinch because property may seem affordable for the month-to-month payments mortgage, but the upfront cost can be a deal breaker if you're not prepared. So how to navigate this smartly? Number 1, plan your CPF and cash balances before you go house hunting. Number 2, don't assume you can use all your CPF if you are taking a bank loan to finance your HDB. Buyers commonly miss out this 5% cash component for the down payment. And number 3, if you are stretching the budget, look into grants for HDB or tiered and deferred payment schemes for private properties. Remember, clearing your LTV hurdle is the first real test of affordability. And so now that we have learned about TDSR and MSR for caps on monthly payments and LTV for the down payments you are responsible for, let's go on to the next surprise, BSD. BSD stands for Buyer's Stamp Duty, a mandatory tax you pay when purchasing any property in Singapore. It's calculated based on the higher of either values, the purchase price or the market value. And this applies to everyone, whether you're buying your first HDB flat or your third condo. The key here is BSD cannot be borrowed for. You can't get a financial institution to lend you money for BSD, it has to be paid out of your own pocket. BSD is a tax that every property buyer in Singapore pays. It's the government's form of taxing property transactions. And over the years, it's become increasingly tiered, especially for higher end properties. Before 2018, it was just a simple 3-step scale, 1%, 2% and 3%. Then in 2018, a 4th tier was introduced for properties above $1 million at 4% buyer's stamp duty. And most recently in 2023, 2 more tiers were added, 5% for properties above 1.5 million and 6% if you're buying a property above $3 million. So yes, the more you spend, the more tax you pay. And today, BSD alone can cost you tens of thousands of dollars, even a 6-figure sometimes, depending on what you're buying. And that is why planning for BSD, whether it's in cash or CPF, is crucial before you even start talking about financing or renovations. And let's say you're buying a 2.5 million condo, here's how the BSD roughly stacks up with the IRAS formula. So 1% on the first 180,000, 2% on the next 180,000, 3% on the next 640,000, 4% on the next 500,000, and 5% on the remaining amount. Your total BSD with this formula comes up to nearly $95,000 paid upon exercising on the property. And again, BSD isn't something you can loan for. So if you're planning your down payment or CPF usage, you must also account for BSD first. If not, you will be risking a very serious cash crunch upon exercising your property. And now that you know BSD is unavoidable, let's move on to the tax that only kicks in for certain buyers, and this usually hurts the most. ABSD. ABSD stands for Additional Buyer Stamp Duty, and unlike Buyer Stamp Duty, this one doesn't apply to everyone. It's a tax you pay on top of Buyer Stamp Duty depending on number 1, your nationality, number 2, the number of residential properties you already own, and number 3, whether you're buying it as an individual or entity, or number 4, whether you're buying it via trust. It was created to cool the market and prevent property hoarding, especially by investors who are buying multiple units or foreigners stepping up prime condos. Here's how it breaks down. If you're a Singapore citizen, you don't pay ABSD on your first home, but if you're buying a second home, you'll be taxed on 20% of the purchase price. Your third property, that jumps to 30%. And if you're a Singaporean PR, the tax starts from your first property and that's a 5% upfront. Your second property, 30%. And if you're a foreigner, you pay 60% ABSD flat on any residential property. If you're buying under a company or trust, the rate goes up to 65%. ABSD was first introduced in December 2011 and back then it was just between 3 to 10%. Then as the market started heating up, the government kept adjusting it. In January 2013, the rates were raised. In July 2018, they were raised again, and in April 2023, we saw the sharpest jump with foreigners paying 60% ABSD and even Singaporean homes taking a hit for 20% tax on their second homes. And so what started as a light tap on the brakes ended up being a full force speed bump for the property market. And as an example, if let's say you're a Singaporean upgrading from your HDB to a condo but you haven't sold your flat yet, that second property comes with a 20% ABSD price tag. And if you notice, this tax rate is just 5% shy of your 25% down payment. So if your condo costs $1.5 million, that is a $300,000 tax bill upfront alongside with your down payment and BSD. And now imagine you're a foreigner buying that same 1.5 million unit, you'll be paying $900,000 in taxes alone. That's not a typo, yes, $900,000 tax. Welcome to ABSD, and the Singapore government thanks you for paying for it. ABSD can derail a deal faster than anything else. Many buyers assume they've done the math until they forget about this tax. And because it's payable upfront in cash or CPF, you can't just put it into your mortgage. Whether you're upgrading or investing, ABSD is the wildest card in your financial plan. And while this seems painful, honestly, ABSD is one of the key measures that protect first-time buyers. It penalizes people who want to hoard properties, buying out everything and leaving little to nothing for the first-time buyers. With ABSD, property hoarders have to think twice before buying a second or third property, and the first-time buyers will get more units on the market to choose from without suffering any penalties. And so how to navigate ABSD smartly? The cleanest way to avoid it all is just to sell your current property before you buy. Reset your property count to 0. You can also turn towards decoupling, removing one spouse's name from the current property and buying another property. But this has other legal and stamp duty implications. We will cover this in another video. And always calculate total cost and not just the property price. ABSD can be the difference between we can afford this and this will financially kill us. And now we've been talking all about cooling measures revolving the buying so far. Let's talk about the selling cooling measures and mechanisms, starting with SSD. SSD stands for Seller Stamp Duty and is one of the least talked about measures. This cooling measure applies to private properties only, and unlike ABSD, which hits you for buying, SSD penalizes you for selling too early. Specifically, it applies if you sell your residential property within a 4-year purchase window now, thanks to the latest update to SSD. It was first introduced in 2010 when property flipping became rampant and prices were so volatile. The goal of this cooling measure was to stop people from treating real estate like stocks. Buy today, sell tomorrow, cash out fast. If you guys remember, back in the late 90s, people were queuing up for new launches of BTOs and then selling their queue numbers for a sum, or selling the OTP immediately after buying to people who did not manage to get a unit. It was madness back then, and people who easily earn 5 digits just by queuing the whole day or getting lucky with their numbers. It was only until early 2000s that the ballot system came out and quelled this whole problem. Even in the resale market, people either sold higher or lower than their original prices in a really short time frame, causing the property market to be very volatile. And thanks to SSD, we see less volatility in the property market today. Anyway, enough of the story time. Here's how it works. Selling within year 1, you'll pay 16% of your sale price. Selling within year 2, you pay 12% of your sale price. Selling within year 3, 8%, and selling within year 4, 4%. So let's say you bought a $1.2 million property and decided to sell it within the first year for $1.3 million. That's gonna be a 208,000 SSD you owe regardless of your profits. And yes, this will be on top of agent fees, legal costs, and loan penalties. SSD forces you to think long term. It punishes impulse buys, protects market stability, and ensures that people aren't churning the market just for short-term profit. And also, let it be known that SSD is calculated from the day you exercise, not the completion or the day you collect keys. And that's right, you thought about it. Sometimes it's overlooked, but for people who decouple, meaning that one owner buys over the other owner's share, that process will also reset the SSD of the share that was bought over. Meaning if the ownership was 50-50 at the start of the purchase and decoupled last year, the 50% shares that was bought over has a new SSD counter starting from last year. So be careful when you're looking to sell the property when you have decoupled before, and reference the exercise dates rather than the completion dates. And if you are considering selling a property within 4 years, pause and run the numbers first. SSD could be the factor that wipes out all your profits before you even see them. The next selling cooling measure is one that is probably more spoken of, MOP, or minimum occupation period, starting all the way back in 1971 as a 3-year requirement for subsidized flats, which was later increased to 5 years in 1973. And this was later extended to resale flats in 2010. The core theme of MOP was to prevent speculation on national resource, and that HDB was meant to be prioritized for people who really needed it. While this is something everyone is familiar with, this itself is a cooling measure. Why? Because of the release of Prime Location Public Housing, or PLH. This segregated HDB into standard, plus, and prime locations, increasing the MOP to 10 years for the plus and prime units. The signal was clear. They didn't want people to speculate or purchase public housing with the sole intent of making their first pot of gold. HDB's core mission is to provide Singaporeans with affordable and sustainable housing, and they were not going to be taken advantage of. And so for HDBs in the plus or prime locations, you will face a MOP of 10 years. This is huge because you could apply for the flat at 25 years old, wait for 4 years for it to be constructed and move in at 29 years old. That means that you will only be able to sell this property at 39 years old, 14 years after the day you applied for it. So while these flats are in superb locations at affordable prices, you will be paying for it with your time. And the last selling cooling measure is related to this new PLH scheme. While they announced this classification of flats and the new MOP requirements, there was another segment that was included and caught everyone's attention, and that is clawback. Clawback will be applicable to plus and prime housing. This clawback is tiered based on location, and it seems like the closer you get to central Singapore, the higher the clawback becomes. And it seems like this clawback may be a scheme by the government to funnel some of these housing profits back into this subsidized pool for future usage again. And while we talk about longer MOP and clawback, the other measure, which I don't really think it's a cooling measure because it increases over time, is actually the household income cap. And so this cap is at $14,000, but based on how the market is recently, we think maybe that the income cap will be increased to $16,000 in the coming years. And so what should you do today as a buyer or seller? If you're a first timer, focus on financial readiness, not the timing. The saying is true, time in the market is better than timing the market. This is no longer the early 2000s, property crashes will not appear overnight. Enter the market with clarity and always go through the numbers and affordability before committing. Never enter the market because of FOMO or obligation. If you're an upgrader, understand loan constraints from TDSR, MSR, and LTV. Plan your sales timeline properly and also remember to factor in things like BSD and time for money to return to your CPF upon the sale. Have a clear reason to anchor to when upgrading. Don't just upgrade for the sake of it or because all your friends are also doing it. And if you're a seller, don't overprice based on headline news. Doesn't mean that Toa Payoh or Dawson can hit $1.5 million means your Hougang flat can too. Buyers are constrained themselves too, especially when you've listened to the entire video. With LTV changing to 75%, especially for HDB, affordability has become a new concern for many buyers. And of course, be realistic. Look towards your valuation or transactions in your area and always rely on professional opinions rather than the hearsay of your neighbors or the uncle auntie in the coffee shop. And there you have it, a breakdown of the cooling measures and how to navigate it. You started this video thinking that the government was out to make your life harder, but now you know they are trying to keep the game fair and the playing field level for everyone. You now have the entire playbook this video to understand the rules and how to navigate it better. Once you understand the rules, the property market mechanism stops feeling like a trap and starts feeling like a game you can actually play. If you're planning your next move, whether it's buying, upgrading, or just figuring out what's possible for you, I'm here. You can also refer to the website below that I left for the financial calculators. WhatsApp me at 96971000 if you have any other questions and I'll help you map out this entire process. And if this has helped a little, drop a like, share this with someone who's been stuck in property paralysis for the last few years, and also subscribe to the channel. I'm ASAP and I will see you in the next video.